The air in the West Wing was unusually tense that Tuesday morning. Karoline Leavitt, the confident and sharp-tongued White House press secretary, briskly walked down the marbled corridor, her heels clicking like gunfire on the polished floors. Rumors had swirled for days, whispers too dangerous to speak out loud. But now, Karoline had proof. President Donald Trump, now in his second non-consecutive term, had tasked her with a job far beyond daily briefings and media clapbacks. "We're draining the swamp for real this time," he had said with a pointed look. "Start with the one everyone's too afraid to touch." That one was none other than Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. It began with a leaked memo, an unsigned draft opinion that shouldn't have existed. It was hidden in a private folder on a Justice Department server flagged during a routine cybersecurity sweep. The memo, dated a year earlier, referenced a secret communication between Barrett and an anonymous political donor. The document hinted at a quid pro quo, favorable judicial consideration in exchange for influence, something that, if proven, could rock the foundations of America's highest court. Karoline hadn't slept much since the document landed on her desk. She cross-referenced it, consulted quiet insiders, and met twice, under cover of night, with a former Supreme Court clerk turned whistleblower who had only one message: "It's bigger than anyone knows." Now, she stood before the press, heart pounding under a veneer of calm. Cameras were live. The White House briefing room, usually filled with murmuring reporters and casual chatter, was now cloaked in an eerie silence. She adjusted the mic. "Good morning. Today's statement will not include a Q&A, she said firmly. "What I'm about to share concerns the integrity of our institutions, something every American, regardless of politics, should care about deeply." There were murmurs. The press smelled blood. "Over the past several weeks," she began, her voice steady, "the Office of the White House Press Secretary, in collaboration with select departments in the DOJ, has reviewed internal communications and verified documents that suggest potential ethical violations by a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Justice Amy Coney Barrett." Gasps filled the room. Pens stopped moving. Karoline held up a sealed manila folder. "This file contains correspondences, emails, financial transaction logs, and a confidential memo tying Justice Barrett to a high-profile corporate lobbying group with direct interests in at least 4 major rulings passed in the last 18 months. The silence that followed was absolute. No one even rustled a notebook. "Let me be clear," Karoline said, her voice like flint. "We are not calling for a coup on the court. We are calling for truth, accountability, and an immediate, independent ethics review." A reporter from CNN finally managed to raise his voice. "Are you accusing a Supreme Court justice of corruption?" "I'm stating the facts, not making accusations," Karoline replied. "The documents speak for themselves." A White House aide signaled her from the side, offstage, but Karoline ignored him. Her eyes scanned the room. For too long, the American people have been told that their courts are untouchable, that justice is above scrutiny. But if even one justice is compromised, then all rulings come under shadow. We won't stand by and let the shadows grow. The weight of her words settled like a storm cloud. She turned to leave but paused. "I'll return with more. This is only the beginning." As Karoline exited the stage, silence followed her like a haunting echo. In the press room, reporters exchanged stunned looks. Phones buzzed. Editors screamed for headlines. Across America, televisions blared the breaking news. Inside the Oval Office, President Trump leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "She did it," he muttered with a half-smile. "Now let's see who blinks first." 3 hours after Karoline Leavitt's stunning announcement, Washington, D.C. was in full-blown crisis mode. The Supreme Court building, typically a fortress of serene marble and dignified silence, now teetered on the edge of chaos. Reporters huddled around the steps. Staffers shuffled nervously in and out, their eyes dodging cameras, their lips sealed shut. The usually stoic Chief Justice John Roberts issued a rare public statement. "The integrity of the judiciary is paramount. We will review all allegations with the seriousness they deserve." Inside a secure White House conference room, Karoline stood before a war room table, surrounded by President Trump's inner circle, Vice President J.D. Vance, Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and National Security Advisor Kash Patel. A red folder labeled Confidential Judiciary Report lay open, its contents spilling out like a political minefield. Barrett has received funds through a back channel, Pam Bondi said, pointing to a flowchart. The money came from the Jefferson Group, a think tank heavily backed by pharmaceutical and tech lobbyists. This group was directly tied to a case Barrett ruled on last year, Everset Pharma v. HHS. That was the one where she sided against regulating insulin price hikes, Vance muttered. Cost taxpayers billions. Karoline nodded. And helped Everset's stock jump 32% overnight. You don't make a ruling like that while taking donations from the same board members, unless you're compromised. Trump leaned forward, hands steepled. What's the next move? Karoline didn't hesitate. We leak one document tonight to trusted sources. Just one. Let the public feel the tremor before the earthquake. Then we push for a congressional ethics hearing. She'll have to recuse herself from pending decisions if this sticks. The president grinned. And if she doesn't? Karoline's eyes narrowed. Then we go public with the audio. The room froze. You have audio? Asked Kash Patel. Karoline reached into her binder and slid out a USB drive. The whistleblower gave us a recorded call. Barrett's aide speaking with a lobbyist confirming their arrangement. She doesn't speak directly, but it's enough to bury the reputation of a sitting justice. Trump leaned back, smiling like a man who had just been handed a royal flush. This is checkmate. But not everyone in Washington was celebrating. Across the city, in a luxury Georgetown brownstone, Amy Coney Barrett sat hunched over her dining table, flanked by 2 legal advisors and her husband Jesse. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with restrained fury. This is political warfare, she whispered, scanning the early coverage on her tablet. They're trying to destroy the court. Justice, said one advisor gently. They have documentation, financials, a recording. She stood up, the controlled poise of a judge slowly giving way to the panic of a hunted figure. They're not just after me. They want to burn the entire conservative judicial legacy to the ground. They want Roe's reversal reversed. They want a puppet court. Her husband tried to calm her. Amy, you have friends, powerful ones. We can weather this. But she wasn't listening. Her mind was spinning. Karoline's press conference wasn't just a shot across the bow. It was a declaration of war. And this war wasn't going to be fought in courtrooms. It would be fought in living rooms, headlines, Senate chambers, and across the social media feeds of a polarized nation. Back at the White House, Karoline sat alone in her office. The buzz of the press briefing had faded. Her inbox flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others threatening. But the one that caught her eye came from an encrypted server marked classified, eyes only. It was a message from the whistleblower. More to come. Barrett is just the tip of the iceberg. Watch Roberts. Karoline stared at the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about Amy Coney Barrett anymore. Karoline Leavitt's phone vibrated twice. A signal. The encrypted reply had been received and opened. She leaned back, her mind racing. The message had been clear. Watch Roberts. The whistleblower, previously anonymous, was revealing a broader scope of corruption, one that extended all the way to the Chief Justice of the United States. She knew what it meant. Amy Coney Barrett's exposure was just the beginning. The implication was terrifying. If both Barrett and Roberts were compromised, the very institution of the Supreme Court might be rotting from within. Karoline didn't hesitate. She forwarded the message to President Trump under a code name they used only for situations of national urgency, Liberty Protocol. Minutes later, her intercom buzzed. Miss Leavitt, came the voice of her aide. The president wants you in the Situation Room. Now. She grabbed her briefcase and hurried down the corridor. Trump's second administration had operated on a war footing since day one, and the Situation Room was now as much a political command center as a military one. When Karoline entered, she found President Trump already seated at the head of the table, flanked by J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, and a grim-faced NSA analyst. Trump didn't waste time. This whistleblower, He said, "You trust them?" "With my life," Karoline said. They were inside the judiciary's internal ethics committee, quietly pushed out 2 years ago after raising red flags. They've been gathering receipts ever since. "And now they're telling us Roberts is next?" J.D. Vance asked, brow furrowed. Karoline nodded. "He's been shielding Barrett and others from scrutiny for years. There's a pattern: cases fast-tracked, ethical complaints buried, recusals ignored." The NSA analyst leaned forward, tapping a tablet. "We pulled digital traffic between Barrett's office and Roberts's internal team. There are inconsistencies, irregular patterns of data transmission through private servers, unsecured, off-book channels." "In plain terms," Trump asked. "They're hiding something," the analyst said, "and they're bad at it." Karoline dropped another bomb. "We also have a link to a private investment fund, Concord Capital. It's run by Barrett's brother-in-law and has grown exponentially thanks to recent court rulings on deregulation. Guess who one of the fund's board advisors is?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "John G. Roberts Jr." Dead silence followed. J.D. Vance leaned back in his chair, exhaling hard. "If we blow this open, it's not just one justice. It's two. The court itself." Trump grinned coldly. "Then we don't just drain the swamp. We detonate it." Elsewhere, Judge Amy Coney Barrett was in freefall. Her conservative defenders on Capitol Hill scrambled to contain the fallout, but behind closed doors, many were privately furious. "She lied," Senator Josh Hawley growled to a group of GOP colleagues. "If this is true, we went to war for her confirmation. For this?" Across the aisle, Democrats were salivating. "This could be our chance," said Senator Elizabeth Warren, "to push judicial ethics reform, court expansion, even revisiting landmark cases. If the public loses faith in the court, we act." But the public was already boiling. Karoline's strategic leak had hit its mark. Overnight, the document showing a wire transfer to a family-linked account exploded across news networks. Even left-leaning commentators who had once distrusted Trump's administration were suddenly forced to ask hard questions. "Whether you love or hate this White House," said a stunned Anderson Cooper on CNN, "this raises red flags about the integrity of the very institution meant to keep America's laws fair and balanced." Even the New York Times ran with the headline, "Unprecedented Corruption? White House Promises More Documents on Justice Barrett." And in the midst of it all, Karoline Leavitt was preparing her next move. Back in her office, she opened a secure locker and removed a second flash drive labeled Liberty Phase 2. Inside were the full audio files, unedited and raw. Conversations, transactions, internal memos, all laying out a web of corruption too intricate to ignore. But she wasn't going to release it just yet. She had something better planned. She picked up the phone and called a contact at CBS News. "This is Karoline Leavitt. I'm offering you an exclusive sit-down interview. Live. Prime time. 1 hour." The journalist stammered. "With who?" She smiled. "Me." The sun had barely set when the major networks interrupted regular programming. A splash screen read, "Breaking. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Exclusive primetime interview." Millions of Americans tuned in. In living rooms, diners, firehouses, college dorms, TVs across the country flickered to the image of Karoline Leavitt seated under the studio lights, facing veteran anchor Marissa Ford of CBS. Ford's tone was sharp but respectful. "Ms. Leavitt, the White House has accused a sitting Supreme Court justice of financial misconduct." "Why now?" Karoline sat poised, dressed in a navy suit, her voice calm and resolute. "Because we finally have proof. And because we believe the American people deserve to know when their trust is being exploited by the very institutions meant to protect it. You've released one document already, a financial transaction tied to Justice Barrett's family. What else do you have?" Karoline held up a flash drive. "Inside this are recordings, phone calls, internal memos, documents connecting Judge Barrett and possibly others to private interests that have benefited directly from her rulings. These aren't theories. They are facts." Ford blinked. "You're saying Barrett received financial gain from a ruling?" Karoline nodded. "The case Everset Pharma v. HHS saw a 3-2 ruling that allowed unchecked insulin price hikes. The majority opinion, written by Barrett, was later traced to language found in a white paper authored by Everset's own legal team. A graphic appeared on screen, showing the matching text side by side. We've also found she was in communication, through intermediaries, with representatives of the Jefferson Group, a lobbying powerhouse with direct ties to Everset. Ford looked stunned. This is a direct ethical breach. And what about Chief Justice Roberts? Karoline didn't blink. Our investigation is ongoing. But we have reason to believe Chief Justice Roberts may have knowingly shielded Barrett from internal investigations. Whether for political alignment or personal interest, that remains to be fully revealed. The studio was silent. No movement, no coughs, no whispered cues. Just a nation watching. Ford leaned forward. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're saying? That the Supreme Court, already under political strain, may now be fundamentally compromised. I do, Karoline replied. But truth doesn't care about optics. Cares about justice. And the American people should never have to wonder if their Supreme Court is for sale. The reaction was instant and explosive. #BarrettGate trended on X within 10 minutes. Tucker Carlson declared it the biggest legal scandal in 100 years. Rachel Maddow called it a devastating indictment of judicial credibility. Even Whoopi Goldberg on The View was left speechless. Outside the Supreme Court, protesters gathered in the thousands. Some demanded Barrett's resignation. Others chanted reform the court, while waving signs of Roberts with puppet strings. Back at the Capitol, panic gripped the Senate Judiciary Committee. Democratic Chairman Sheldon Whitehouse called an emergency session to consider opening a full inquiry. Meanwhile, Republican leadership was split, some defending Barrett vehemently, others quietly backing away. In a closed-door meeting, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell muttered to aides, "If this storm keeps growing, we may have to cut her loose." And inside Barrett's home, all was silent, except for the sound of a ticking clock. She had not spoken publicly since the leak. Her official statement had been carefully crafted, claiming no wrongdoing and political retaliation. But inside, she knew the walls were closing in. The flash drive was real. The phone call was real, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't bluffing. That night, as Secret Service swept the West Wing, Karoline stood alone in the press secretary's briefing room. She stared at the podium, where earlier she'd revealed the first piece of evidence that would rattle the Supreme Court to its core. President Trump walked in, his face lit by the soft glow of overhead lights. "You handled that like a warrior," he said. Karoline offered a faint smile. "We're not done yet." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "You've done more in a week than most do in a lifetime." As he left the room, Karoline looked again at the empty seats where the press had sat, hungry for the next headline. She knew what came next wouldn't be easy. Calls for resignations, Senate hearings, perhaps even impeachment. But truth had a momentum of its own. And now, there was no stopping it. A week after the primetime interview, America was still on fire. Cable news anchors no longer argued about whether the leaks were real. They were analyzing the timeline of corruption. Protesters outside the Supreme Court erected massive posters of Coney Barrett's face with the word "sold" stamped over it. Late-night comedians had dropped their usual partisan jabs and were now calling for judicial term limits. Even the Wall Street Journal demanded full transparency or full resignations. In a closed-door meeting, Chief Justice Roberts sat at the head of the table in the highest court in the land, flanked by Barrett, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and the others. The air was suffocating with tension. Roberts adjusted his glasses and spoke in a tone he hadn't used since the Obamacare ruling. "I've tried to contain this," he admitted, "to protect the dignity of the court. But this?" He tapped a thick binder of internal memos, leaked call logs, and financial records. "This cannot be ignored." Coney Barrett, pale and silent, finally spoke. "I didn't take a dime directly," she said. "It was all legal, gray maybe, but legal." Roberts snapped. "Ethics don't live in the gray, Amy. And neither does the court." The silence that followed was not of reverence, but of reckoning. Meanwhile, at the White House, Karoline Leavitt stood before a podium packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters. They no longer asked dismissive questions. They leaned in, recording every word. "The president has instructed the DOJ to cooperate with Congress fully," she said, her voice calm. "An independent ethics commission will begin a full review of all 9 justices' financials, communications, and potential conflicts of interest." A reporter from the Washington Post raised his hand. "Does this mean the White House supports term limits or judicial reform?" Karoline didn't blink. "The president supports accountability. However, that must be achieved." Another reporter from MSNBC spoke over the crowd. "Ms. Leavitt, what do you say to critics who believe this is political vengeance, not justice?" Karoline leaned in, her voice sharp but steady. "I say to them, Justice Barrett ruled on laws that affected millions of Americans. Rulings that potentially benefited her own family's wealth. This isn't political. It's ethical. It's legal. And it's necessary." That clip went viral in seconds. 2 days later, the bombshell dropped. Justice Amy Coney Barrett announced a voluntary leave of absence from the Supreme Court pending the ethics investigation. The room did, once again, go silent. It wasn't a resignation yet, but it was the first time in modern history a sitting justice had stepped away under pressure from the executive and public alike. Hours after the announcement, Chief Justice Roberts issued a terse public statement. "The Supreme Court remains committed to its integrity. All members of the bench must be held to the highest standards. We welcome the inquiry." But internally, Roberts was on thin ice. Karoline's intel had forced a dozen subpoenas into motion, including one targeting a private family trust tied to his wife's investment portfolio. His name was next in the headlines. Behind closed doors, President Trump huddled with Karoline, J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, and Vice President Mike Johnson. "This is bigger than Barrett," J.D. said. "It's the entire culture around the court. Untouchable. Unaccountable. It's time for term limits, mandatory audits, and ethics enforcement." Trump turned to Karoline. "You got us this far. You think the country is ready for that?" Karoline smiled faintly. "They're not just ready, Mr. President. They're demanding it." And she was right. Polls showed over 70% of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike, supported sweeping judicial reform after the Barrett scandal. Editorials, once skeptical of Karoline Leavitt's rise, now credited her with shaking the foundations of unchecked power in America. She became not just a mouthpiece, but a moral compass for a restless nation. In one widely shared moment, a young law student in a CNN town hall stood up and asked her, "Ms. Leavitt, you exposed one of the highest judges in the land. What gave you the courage to risk your career, even your safety?" Karoline looked at the student with firm eyes and answered, "Because I believe in America. Not the corrupt version, the real one. The one our founders envisioned. Where no one is above the law." The room erupted in applause. By the end of the month, the Senate Judiciary Committee had opened formal impeachment inquiries. A bipartisan coalition was quietly forming to draft new legislation on term limits and financial disclosures for all federal judges, and behind it all stood Karoline Leavitt, the young, unflinching press secretary who walked into the fire and exposed the rot that others feared to confront. In time, books would be written, documentaries produced. But for now, one headline in The Atlantic captured it best. She spoke. They listened. And America's justice system will never be the same.